Thank you very much. It's a real honor to be here. And I love doing these things. And it's an honor and a pleasure because for me, I get as much out of this that hopefully that you'll get with some of the work that I share. I was privileged to be part of the jury. I saw some fantastic work in the integrated category, and I'm not just saying that because I'm here in your country. I'm saying that because it was stuff of a standard that I think should be recognized internationally. It was fantastic work, incredibly insightful, and I just want to share some of the stuff that I do. Just to give you 30 seconds on me, I spent about 20 years in advertising, design, digital agencies, and some of you might be able to relate with my story, which was I was the digital sort of thorn in the agency. I was the one who was constantly pushing people to try to think about things in a different way. And I was like the digital specialist, I was like tasked with infecting the agencies and clients and that sort of thing. And I spent a lifetime doing that, and I call it the back of the deck guy. I was at the back of the deck. They do the presentation, I was the back of the deck, and if we ran out of time, I'd never get to present anything. But I was like digital. And then I get a job at Google, which is a company that is so inherently digital. I mean, well, the business is digital. The business is driven entirely by technology. And I go from being the most digital person to the least digital person overnight, and I have to work in a company run by engineers, not by marketeers, and completely think about what we do and how we do it in a very different way. Building product as opposed to selling service, ensuring that we're incredibly empathetic to the user, making their lives better, but allowing them to tell their story. Just really interesting, and that's the sort of stuff I want to share. So as I said, I think technology, I'm a huge proponent. It changed my life. And I want to show you some things that sort of demonstrate how we took down barriers. Again, that are the things that don't allow people to do what they should be able to do. Provide access. By access, I don't mean internet access. That could be one form of access, but use technology. I'm going to show you how we opened up Abbey Road Studios. For the first time ever, you can go into Abbey Road Studios using technology. Unless you were like the Beatles or Pink Floyd, you can't get into Abbey Road Studios. That's a pretty cool thing. And this notion of giving superpowers to others, how we create these platforms and these products that, again, aren't about us, they're about what you're going to do with them. And I'll show you some stuff on YouTube, I'll show you some stuff that we do for Google Science Fair. So I'll get right into it. I'm going to show you a lot of video. This is probably the most talking you'll get out of me. What is Creative Lab? We're a very small team in London. Our remit is all of EMEA. We're about 25 people, which maybe not sound that small, but we do all of Europe, Middle East, and Africa. We're also helping with India. We work across all of our products. So we do Android, YouTube, Chrome, Google. And I've assembled a team of sort of creative misfits. I try to get people from all over the world, an incredibly international team with completely different cultural backgrounds, skill sets, disciplines, and I love to create these sort of collisions. And I think hopefully some of that will come out in the work. We bring a massive dose of what I call creative naivety to everything we do. Sometimes we're asked to do stuff like a wearable, which I'm going to show you later, where we've never done these wearables. Wearables have only been out for a few sort of years, but we bring this completely new perspective, and we put ourselves in these uncomfortable positions. And we try to rethink how we do things in a very experimental way. So everything you see had a proper brief, because I'm often, sometimes I show this stuff and people are like, oh, you guys can just do whatever you want. We can't do whatever we want. We actually get these briefs, we get budgets, we have a small innovation fund, we prototype rapidly, we get stuff in front of the different teams, and if the teams think that this will have traction and it delivers against this promise of user first and that sort of thing, they'll support it. If they don't, everything I show you today, there's many things that just didn't make it. So it's, we apply a huge amount of rigor to everything we do. And this whole notion of inventing the future, I mean, easier said than done. I was asked to come up with a mission statement within our group, and this is a good summation, and I think these things are quite important. But we were trying to figure out, what sounds mission-y? That's not serious, that's not businessy. And yeah, we're a bunch of sort of vagabonds, but I think the idealist aspect is the thing that we love to bring to things is this kind of filter where we think that because we're the whatever storytellers, creators, whatever you want to call us, because we put out there, we'll be seen, dare I say, consumed by so many people. If you put stuff out there with a positive message that makes an impact, that's a good thing. And we can all kind of do that. You don't need to work at Google to do that. And this is fundamentally what we believe in. And it's an incredibly important thing, and I'm sure there's variations of this thing existing in the companies that you work for and agencies that you work for. But we believe in know the user, okay? And this is one of our founding principles. And the idea that you need to have a real understanding of people, real people outside of even organizations like ours, and everything about the hardships and their day-to-day difficulties, everything that they endure. And when you really have that empathetic view of life and the world that they live in, it's an incredibly powerful starting point for your communications because it focuses it in a certain way. And then secondly, know the magic. And again, when we talk about magic at Google, we don't talk about functionality or features or that sort of thing. We talk about magic within a product. And the example I use all the time is when I was growing up in Canada, I'm from Vancouver originally, I remember when Google Earth first came out. And I remember going into Google Earth I was in London when Google Earth first came out, and I remember going into Google Earth and typing in Columbia Street in Vancouver, British Columbia, where I grew up, where I used to play street hockey on icy roads in the winter. And I remember the globe loading and it spinning, and then it crashed zooming into North America and going into Canada and going into British Columbia. And then I see this aerial shot of the street that I grew up on. And that was an incredibly emotive experience for me, incredibly emotive experience. And I think that is the magic. It's not about real-time data and all this sort of stuff that's happening in the background. It was the magic that came out of the product. So I want to show you a bit of that. And then lastly, why do we do these things? I think you could cover up Google and you could say this is what everybody should be thinking about in this world where people have a massive amount of power through their voice and what they can do and how they can influence relationships, brands, all that sort of thing. You need to keep telling people about the magic and why they should continue to love your brand. And that's what we do. We try to remind the world what they love about Google. So let's get into it. So the first thing I want to show is something where we were tasked to come up with for Chrome, the browser. And again, the brief on the surface was probably not dissimilar to stuff that you get. It was a browser, it's superior due to these aspects, the way it treats images, the way that it treats data, it's faster, et cetera, bring this to life, right? Could do a TV spot, nothing wrong with that, and we did do many TV spots. Could do a display campaign, but we sat around and we said, wouldn't it be interesting to change the relationship that people think they have with a browser? And right now, the way that people interact with browsers is primarily through their screens on devices, on their laptops, on their tablets, on their mobile phones, okay? And we said, wouldn't it be incredible if we could liberate the browser from these screens and create an environment that really brought the power and, dare I say, magic of the browser to life? So we created this thing called WebLab. And WebLab was a physical space that we created at the Science Museum in London. And that space was open for a year. And it allowed people to go in and visit a series of installations, 5 different installations, that brought to life the different product features of the browser in an exhibition that was completely open, okay? What do I mean by open is you could go in and visit it physically, like you could this space here, but you could also log on to the space from anywhere in the world and access it. And what we did, this is the space, it was 660 square meters. And again, I mean, back to the ragtag group of vagabonds and idealists, this here is architecture, product design, industrial design, service design. I mean, it's a ton of stuff that we kind of pretended to know how to do. We brought in some people who were better than us. We brought in people who could help us. But, you build these things, and you kind of hold your breath, and you hope that they're going to work, right? So we built this space. It had 5 installations. The first installation was a series of what we called sketchbots. And they were these little robots that had a little sand pit underneath each one of them. And you could log on to them again from the internet, and you can actually control them, or you could use them in the space. They would take a picture of you, they would take the bitmap image of your photograph, they would turn it into a vector, and they would show how the browser treated processed information and imagery within the browser. It would then draw your picture, and you'll see a video in a minute that shows that. It would draw your picture in the sand as line art. So we dumbed it down and made it really lo-fi, which we loved that tension between the high-tech and the lo-fi. It recorded it, it sent you that video back to your YouTube channel, and then it erased it forever, so you never saw it again. So it was a moment in time. It was quite magical. This is called the Universal Orchestra, and this was all about the inbuilt bits of functionality that allow for real-time communication and collaboration within the Chrome browser. So we created an orchestra, and again, you could go up to these abstracted instruments and you could play them through the browser. We created an interface, but by the same token, some of the instruments were dedicated to people online. So you'd be playing an instrument in the museum, and somebody would log on from Argentina and play the one next to you, and you'd have this universal orchestra. This was called the data tracer, and one of the things we wanted to show was the idea that sometimes we take for granted how quickly information comes back to us, okay? You type something in and instantly, it says like, this came back to you in milliseconds. And what we wanted to do was reveal the infrastructure of the internet. We wanted to show that when you type in a query, or when you click on an image and you look for it, we wanted to show where that information resides, somewhere in the world, and then we wanted to show the distance and the route that it travels, which isn't always the straightest route. We know that with the internet. And then in elapsed time, we wanted to show how quickly it comes back to you. And it was pretty cool. This was a giant Corian relief that we projection mapped onto. And again, you'll see a bit of that in the video. And then lastly, this was pretty cool. This was, I mean, especially now with all this Oculus and cardboard and all that, but this was a few years ago, but we created these things called teleporters. And as you can see, they're in these little circles. And what we wanted to do, like I said earlier about providing access and that sort of thing, is what we wanted to do is we wanted to allow people to be able to visit places that were out of bounds in the real world, okay? So we put these cameras all over the world, one of which was in a shark tank in Cape Town, in the aquarium, I believe. And we put a dome-shaped camera in the shark tank during feeding time, and you'd stick your head into this teleporter, it had binaural sound, and then you would rotate, and you were doing a 360 in the actual shark tank, and it was pretty crazy. And it was pretty cool because, again, one of the big things we wanted to do was get kids thinking about coding. We wanted to get kids thinking about code in a very different way, and that code isn't just a bunch of characters on a screen. Coding means teleportation. Coding means robots. Coding means real-time instruments from around the world. So I'll just play the film now. So for me, like, you know, working with, dare I say, a virtual brand, it's incredibly important to have a physical presence, to show people who you are, what you believe in, and the magical things you could do with the brand physically as alongside digitally. Next thing I want to show is also something that we did physically in the real world. And again, and I'm only giving background because I want people to understand the thinking process, which is, I think, even more important than the work. But we have a group called Developer Relations at Google, and it's their job to go out to developers and technologists and coders and to talk to them about all these incredible products and platforms and APIs and all these really cool things that we have that allow you to be really, really creative using technology. Again, like, that's a pretty tough brief, okay? And it's a tricky one. It's not like liberate the browser from the screen and do a crazy installation. So we thought about this, and we do a lot with really talented digital artists, okay? And this is one of the digital artists we do a lot of work with. And this is a moleskin, you know, the ones that I think Monet and Van Gogh and people like that used years ago. And this is one of the digital artists, and we took a picture of his thinking and how he goes about coming up with ideas for his projects. And we looked at this and we thought, well, this guy is kind of an artist. I mean, you know, he's an artist. He's doing stuff for today, and it's really current. It involves coding and all that sort of stuff. But like, how can you not look at this and think that there isn't a creative process going on, creative thinking going on? And then we had this kind of thought, this insight, which again, you know, it was debated internally, externally, but, you know, I thought, you know, if art, I studied art history, if art is meant to be a reflection of what was going on in society, and I remember learning about Goya and those horrific images of bodies on trees and stuff like that during the Spanish Civil War and all these sorts of things, I thought, if you really think about it, if it's meant to be a reflection, and you think about the world we're living in today and how prevalent and prominent technology is in our everyday lives, you would argue, I would argue, again, this is all open for debate, that technology is underrepresented in the art world, okay? And how do we fix this? So we came up with this thing called DevArt, art made with code, and the whole idea was this notion of technology being a canvas for creativity, and that you don't need to put a technologist with a creative director. You don't need to put a coder with an art director and create these sort of, you could do that, and people do it, and I've done it in the past, but we wanted to prove that developers and coders were inherently creative people. And how do we do this? We partnered up with the Barbican, world-renowned exhibition space, gallery in London. They put on a show that was on last summer called The Digital Revolution, and we had the last space in a really cool part of the gallery called the Curve Gallery, where they did some incredible work, like the rain room that you walked into and you never got rained on, even though it was raining all the time. And we thought, we're going to invite people from around the world to put forward their submissions, these tech people, and then we're going to give them the opportunity to display their work in a gallery, a world-renowned gallery, to show that it's incredibly creative stuff. It will last all summer in the UK, and it will tour for 5 years. I mean, what a pretty incredible thing to go from being, for the most part, somebody in a back room or somebody who's providing very much a support function for other people, to being somebody exhibiting your tech digital work in a gallery. And this is the film for that. And it's interesting, when you look at that body of work, like, how can you say that is not art? It's almost like you look at the other stuff, and again, with no disrespect to anyone, the stuff that I studied, the oil and the acrylic on canvas, and you think almost, that's really dated. I mean, it's incredible in terms of like the history and preservation, but by the same token, I think this is much more reflective. So what we did is we built a site that tapped into a site called GitHub that some of you may know, that is a repository of code, because we wanted our whole thing to be much more around collaboration and the process of the making of the art. So again, I can't imagine, maybe some traditional artists kind of do a lot of collaboration and open up their trade secrets and all that, but that's exactly what we wanted to do. So you could actually submit something, but you'd publish your work, other people could nick your code, they could use stuff from your libraries, all these really interesting things to create a whole new way of thinking about the art world, a very open and accessible way. And then what we did is we commissioned 3 world-renowned digital artists, Karsten Schmidt, who's German but lives in the UK, Varvara and Mar, who are Estonian and Spanish, and Zach Lieberman, who's from New York. And then we left the 4th plinth, the 4th spot in the DevArt gallery, to somebody that we would crowdsource, an unknown digital artist. So I want to show you a bit of one of the films, just so you get some of the thinking of how these people think. And all of these films are available online, but I wanted to show you Zach Lieberman. Zach's is really interesting. Zach lives in New York, and it's really funny, like he was talking about being able to create an instrument that allows you to tune into global conversations. And he was talking about loving the fact that there was this serendipitous thing happening in New York where you jump into a taxi, for example, and you never knew what was playing on the radio and where that music was coming from. And he said, well, I wonder if I could use technology to tap into all of these radio stations in the world and then tune them to the different keys of a keyboard and then allow people to actually play that instrument and capture the entire world, effectively play the world. So I'll let him say it.
I'm trying to bring joy to people, make people smile. I'm trying to create strange, unique moments for people. My background is in fine arts, and I studied painting and printmaking, and I'd always loved animation. I love this idea of animation as bringing something to life, and this idea that you could write code and breathe life into things, for me, was really fascinating. A lot of the projects that I do involve gesture, involve drawing. What does it mean to make a mark? There's something really kind of fundamentally important with putting a line down on a piece of paper. That's like saying, I'm here. And a lot of what I do is ask those what-if questions. What would it look like for a line to uncurl itself? Then you have to write the software to see that answer. And I think we need a culture of poems. I use the term poetic computation to describe what we do. For me, poetry is the right words in the right order. Code is also the right words in the right order. It is a very economical amount of words and very specific words that tell the computer to do specific things. What's happening a lot now is that we're winding our way into these museums through the back door. The next generation of curators coming up will have grown up learning processing and learning these tools and being part of these communities. And so as we grow up together, there will be more and more accepted into the art world. A lot of the stuff I do is in code, but when it comes to building stuff, I spend a lot of time looking at materials. Use speakers and components, and sometimes it's really useful just to get ideas. There's data all around us, and one phenomenon is that you jump into a taxi cab and you have no idea what music is going to be playing. It could be talk radio or sports or Senegalese music. My DevArt proposal is called Play the World. It's a keyboard where you press a note and it finds that note that's happening live in audio streams from around the world. Always these projects start with a crazy idea. One of my responsibilities is to get myself in trouble, and then the act of making the work is getting yourself out of trouble.
So that's Zach's project, Play the World. And these are some early sketches. Again, everything we do is paper prototyped. Everything is scamps and sketches. And again, we wanted to create this space that allowed for you to be surround. Again, binaural sound, and really take in the world from around you. These are some early renderings of the actual space that we proposed, working with Zach. And this is the actual space that we created. So it's not a great picture, but you can see those big things hanging are sound muffling pieces of fabric. Embedded in the sound muffling fabric are speakers, each dedicated to a different key. And then there's a little LED monitor underneath the speakers, which tells you where in the world that you're tuning into. On the map, you type in the different keys, you play the different keys, and you can see where you've landed in the world. And you put all that together, and it creates an incredible experience when you start playing the thing. And again, a lot of what we do is trying to get kids inspired by technology and get them into coding and learning different languages. So you could imagine kids just going crazy on this thing at the actual exhibition. Carsten Schmidt did something really interesting, tiny bit controversial, but what he wanted to do was create a space with a 3D printer, a UV resin-based 3D printer that allowed you to actually create a piece of art and display it in the gallery alongside all the other art. And his whole thing, Code Factory, was based on what he calls generative system thinking, and this idea of, what he outlined here was this idea that he was going to provide you with a wireframe of the first piece, and everything else will be derived from it. So everything is effectively connected to something else. So what we did is, this is his actual space, is that entire cone-like shape is made up of a bunch of individual tiles that were all printed from the 3D printer at the base of it. That's a 3D printer. So the idea was that the structure itself was born of itself. It was born from the printer, and then those little terminals around it were a piece of software that he wrote with those generative designs on there, so that you could design it, you could send it to the printer, and then lastly, you can see that wall that has all the shelving on it. You could display it in the gallery. And his whole thing was, if I create the output device, the 3D printer, I create the interface to allow you to design it, and I give you the space to display it in the gallery, effectively I'm providing anybody the tools to display and create art. Okay? Again, slightly controversial. I think there's more that possibly goes into it, but what he wanted to do was challenge the notion of authorship, okay? Again, using technology in a very different way. So it was really cool, his one. And the last one I'll show is Varvara and Mar. And they created a thing called the wishing wall. And this is pretty cool. They took, they wanted to be able to take something that was very much based on this intimate thing, the wish, something that somebody holds inside them, and they wanted to do two things. They wanted you to sort of externalize it and share it, but they also wanted to transform it into something beautiful and magical. So you walked up to one of those little speakers, and again, it was really interesting from a UX perspective. All we used was color, blue and red, and blue prompted you to go, red told you you were recording, and then it stopped. And while you looked at it to wait for the next step, you stepped back and you saw the whole thing come to life. And what it did is you spoke into that little speaker and you said something like, I don't know, I wish I could fly. And it took your voice, it converted it into text, and it would spell it on the wall. It would project it on the wall. It said, I wish I could fly. And then what it did is it took the typography and it transferred it into transitioned it into a cocoon-like shape. And then that cocoon would metamorphosize and spit out one of these butterflies. And the butterflies would take on the properties and the sentiment of the wish. So the colors, the shape, the size. And then as Mar is showing, you could put your hand out, the butterfly would land on your hand momentarily, and then if you step back, it would fly into the cluster and they would fly all over the gallery. And again, it was pretty magical to see that happening, and the use of technology. And that's why, I'm a bit biased, but I look at the stuff and I didn't make this stuff, they made this stuff. And I think that's not art? Come on, you guys, that's bloody art. In my opinion, scrap bloody. And then, so I'll keep going because I want to show you a lot of stuff. This is something we launched probably about a month ago. Abbey Road Studios. Most famous music studio in the world. There are kids strumming Beatles tracks, on their guitars all over the world. And if you think about the impact on society and popular culture that this little studio in a little leafy street in Maida Vale had, okay, on the world is incredible. And what was really interesting about it is it had such an effect, but by the same token, it is completely closed to people from all over the world. And that's partly, it's not an elitist thing, it's a working studio. Jay-Z records there, Florence and the Machine records there, really, current artists alongside some of the more historic ones. But we talked to them, and we came up with this idea of how do we use technology to bring people in to experience the magic of Abbey Road Studios, the history, the heritage, the experts who will help talk you through all the different things that happened there, the anecdotes, the engineers, the processes they used to make funny sounds in Pink Floyd albums, all these really interesting things. And we thought, now that would be really, really cool to share with the world. So we did this thing called Inside Abbey Road. We took people inside. We created complete 360 walkthroughs with streaming video. So it wasn't just a static experience. We used video and data and all these sorts of things to really bring it to life. We created these narratives. They have one of the most extensive microphone collections in the world. And the microphones all have nuances and tell stories and all these sorts of things. We created digital versions as gadgets of all the mixing sort of boards and the 4-track machines, and allowed people to do them online. And then these immersive tours. And I remember when I sat down with the team, I have to say these stupid things that act as provocations all the time. So I said to the guys, you know what, I don't want this to be a site that's just kind of like a geographic walkthrough. I had been spending a lot of time on planes, and I remember I was watching a lot of BBC iPlayer documentaries and some great stuff like the David Bowie one and some really interesting things. And I said, you know what, we have the opportunity to create sort of an interactive documentary. Everything that those iPlayer things have, but with much more of an immersive experience. And that's what we should do. We should create an interactive documentary. And they took that, and they built this thing with, I think, 3 hours of content. I said, I don't want to be measured on, 1,000 people visited for 10 minutes. I want, people. I want parents with their kids. I want aspiring musicians. I want them to spend a lot of time with this, make it worth their while, be empathetic to their time, make it worth their while. So again, I only put this in because, again, a bit of an insider tip. We all know this, the world is going mobile. This isn't responsive, this is mobile first. This worked better, as well, if not better, than it did on desktop. And it's incredibly important that you design around mobile. So I thought I'd throw that in. And this is the launch film for this.
Abbey Road. Hundreds of thousands visit this iconic UK recording studio every year. But the famous Ever Crossing and graffiti film are as close as most of them can get. Until now. Google presents Inside Abbey Road. Made in partnership with Abbey Road, the site enables anyone, anywhere in the world to explore the studios via desktop, mobile, and tablet. With more than 150 different panoramas and over 3 hours of content to discover, it dynamically tells Abbey Road's 80-year-old story. Images and YouTube videos are plotted in line, in the exact spot they were originally captured, from Sir Edward Elgar conducting in 1931 to the London Symphony Orchestra recording in Studio One. You can even get hands-on with interactive versions of studio equipment, like the J37 4-track or Abbey Road's incredible mic collection. There are also 3 curated audio tools to choose from, narrated by Abbey Road luminaries.
Hello, and welcome to Studio One.
And all the film scores, albums and songs created in the studios are available to download directly from Google Play. The site is promoted via online banners, an interactive masthead that lets you sign a will, as well as a launch film and an out-of-home campaign. Bespoke tweets from famous musicians drove even more people there. But the best promotion was the overwhelming reaction from everyone around the world. In just 1 week, over 1.7 million people across the world stepped inside Abbey Road. And the project got the world talking. From major international networks to respected musical publications. It proved that Inside Abbey Road had not just let people inside the studios, but inspired them as well. A true testament to a legend of musical history.
And what I love about that little stat at the end is it's not a bragging thing or an awards thing. Is if you could imagine on the Friday before we launched, maybe 100 people came into Abbey Road Studios, engineers, musicians, whatever, support staff, maybe a few hundred on the Friday. On the Monday, 1.7 million people came that week. And that's the power of technology. That's what I meant by breaking down barriers and all this sort of marketing speak. That's what you can do. So this is, again, when I was saying earlier, this idea of going into things with this sort of healthy dose of creative naivety. We worked with a really interesting team called ATAP at Google in Mountain View, Advanced Technology and Product, and they're like incredible, like geniuses. And they have developed this, and bear with me on this, they had developed this thread, and the thread is conductive, okay? So you could pass a current through the thread. And then when you take the thread, and you take a lot of conductive threads and you weave them together, you create a fabric. And that fabric is capacitive, meaning it's got capacitive properties, meaning it's like a touch screen, but it's fabric, okay? Conductive thread, capacitive fabric, okay? And we thought, wouldn't it be really interesting to try to reinvent how we think about wearables? I've got this thing here. It tells me that stuff is happening on my phone. It's interesting. I'm not sure it's 100% there yet. But this is interesting because it's creating a whole new relationship between you and technology. It's getting technology out of the way. It's making it an invisible interface. You hear these things, you read about these things all the time. And it was just a really interesting thing to be tasked to work on. And we had never worked on anything like this before. We had to become like experts in something that no one's really an expert in as of yet. So the reason I show all these posters and videos is, and I should have said it up front, is everything we do in the Creative Lab starts with a poster and a launch film, because we try to do the things before we do the real thing. So we, like David Droga, I think it was Alex Boguski used to talk about write the press release, okay, to establish, and I know Chuck Porter's going to be talking, to establish what this thing, what people will say about this thing. We do these posters as a proof of concept, and this idea in one line. You need to understand what this thing is right away, and then we do these videos in order for people to get immediately what we're trying to do tonally, functionally, all that sort of thing. So this is called Project Jacquard. All that technology you're seeing at the top of the poster has more or less been miniaturized and put into the fabric, okay? And I'm going to show you. We launched this at I/O. We created this little display. I/O is the big developers conference that Google puts on in San Francisco every year. We created this massive table that replicated a jacquard loom. And it had all the fabric coming in from the ceiling, and then it created this. Effectively, it looked like a tablecloth, and that tablecloth, as you'll see here, was interactive, and it was crazy. Like, you could see this person demoing it, and you can see what the screen is actually reading. That data visualization is showing the sensitivity of that, and all it is a piece of fabric. That's all it is. And I'll show you the film for this that we put as a summation, because I think, again, it'll tell the story much thoroughly.
What I find fascinating about textiles, the structure of textiles, is the same to the structure of touchscreens, which we're using in everyday mobile devices and tablets. That means that if you just replace some of the threads in textile with conductive threads, you should be able to weave the textile, which can recognize a variety of simple touch gestures, just like any normal touch panel you have a mobile phone. So if you can hide or weave interactivity and input devices into the materials, that will be the first step to making computers and computing invisibly integrated into the objects and materials and clothing. So this is exciting to me. The challenge of creating jacquard yarn was to create yarn that is highly conductive and at the same time scalable, which means it could be used on industrial weaving machines everywhere in the world.
For textile designers or fashion designers or furniture designers, it is interesting because it's something you're very familiar with. It's just textile. We made the yarn very thin and feels so natural, so it looks like just normal yarn. The only thing that's different is it's conductive. We work with textile designers from all over the world, and it's really interesting to see what kind of possibilities that we can have. Could be visible, very obviously, like it's here. But also can be totally invisible. So we're creating possibilities by combining different way of weaving technique and And that's totally up to designers to choose, and it's up to their creativity.
We're trying to shrink down all the components down to the size of a button, and ultimately this will be something that's so small we can embed into the manufacturing process. So the users won't even see it or feel it inside the garment.
The idea that Jacquard is an interface that is blended into the clothing that we wear, that has an implication in the way that you would use services, products, applications, and anything that we do through our devices. It's somehow getting the technology out of the way and making interactions more natural and more seamless.
In terms of what the technology can do, it's really up to the user and to the designers, and we expect that users can reconfigure it as much as they want to. Software development and fashion design often don't exist in the same place, so we're hoping to make it very simple for each of those parties to collaborate, and we're hoping to provide both software and hardware knowledge and components to make those collaborations very easy.
We like to think that we have these iconic products that haven't changed much, but the world is changing. So I think Jacquard presents a great opportunity for a brand, for design, to open a door to the future.
The idea of adding technology is another layer that would be integral to the fabric but add to the narrative. I'd be so excited to see what designers would do and what the end product will be.
In tailoring, we use methods that have been used and not changed for 200 years. So when something new comes along, it's really exciting. What's amazing about the project is that I don't have to have any knowledge about the electronics and how it works. So let's see what we can create with it.
Jacquard is a blank canvas for designers and developers. We are just at the beginning, and we are really excited to see what people are going to do with it.
It's cool. So what I was going to say is, on this thing, I didn't invent it. Yvonne is the guy. We bring these things to life, and what's cool about it is what's really interesting from our perspective. Again, we create these vision films. We show people the opportunity. We're producing a prototype with Levi's. You'll see it soon. But what's really cool is we were like, is it kind of a wearable? No pun intended. And we thought, you know what? Like, get technology out of the way. And if wearables are associated to devices like these watches and that sort of thing, there was somebody who said ages ago when we all started out in marketing, when you're late to market, create your own category. And we said, we don't want to position ourselves as a wearable. We want to position ourselves as an invisible. So that's how we positioned it. And that's why we got like a Savile Row tailor, like an old world craftsperson, to see if they can weave it into a tailored bespoke suit. So these tensions. So that was Project Jacquard. I've got a couple more, so bear with me. So this one here is just it's more of just a little footnote on YouTube. Because again, I'm not plugging this because I work at Google, but I think YouTube is incredible. And I think it's incredible why? Because again, and I'm going to show my age in a minute, but when I was starting out, if you wanted to make a piece of content, a piece of film, and you wanted to broadcast it to the world, you needed expensive kit, probably not dissimilar to what we're being recorded on right now. You needed to pitch it to a production company. You needed to book traditional media space, all this sort of stuff that overnight went away when these guys created this platform. And I worked with the local team to get some of these stats and these individuals locally that you'll recognize better than myself. But you have a bunch of people who, and these are their views for some of their content and films that they've put out, are in the millions. And I know we live in a world where like millions are thrown around like it's not a big deal. But I counted this, and I think it was something like between the four, and there's many more. These are just ones that we selected locally. Between them, just on these bits of content that we were measuring, they had over 60 million combined views, which I think is like the entire population of the UK where I live, which is pretty incredible to think that you have an idea, you have the platform, and if it's good enough and people are engaged by it, you can put this stuff out, and people will come. And I want to just show a little trailer to a film that we did that talks about the UK creators. And again, I guess I'm kind of encouraging people to like think about this, because I think this is going to be even bigger than it is right now. And when you see this film and you see the UK creators, some of the famous UK creators, and 1 million people lining up to meet them at Topshop, outside Topshop on Oxford Street and stuff like that in London. And you know, they have followings that are bigger than musicians and celebrities. And it's just, again, one of these phenomena that comes out of this type of technology.
Doing this is fun, but sometimes it is a lot.
They are the stars of YouTube.
It might look like teenage hysteria.
The UK is producing huge global stars, many celebrities will enter.
This is not something that I was ever prepared for. I am just trying to get my head around the whole thing.
I do just want to put out my whole soul and my whole existence online.
Well, identical twins. I can make you laugh whenever I want to. Thank you very much.
Hello. I just want to make everyone happy, which I know is impossible.
Our parents don't really understand what it is we do.
I started pouring my heart out, hoping that it would matter for people.
I mean, as I said, that's just the trailer for the film, and it's just mind-blowing. And again, I've got kids, and my kids spend hours watching this stuff. And it's just one of these things that it's a space that still is rife for a lot of creativity and a lot more content. Last thing I want to share. So this is the last thing. At the beginning of this presentation, I said break down barriers, provide access, that sort of stuff. And I had this thing, I think it said, and give superpowers to others. And you guys were like probably thinking, oh, he's trying to be like kooky or something. And what I meant by superpowers to others is this, right? And this is a platform that we do every year. And I'm going to show you the first year that we did it, because I think it's pretty cool. And it's one of those things that we create the platform for other people to do incredible things on, okay? So we do this thing every year called Google Science Fair. And Google Science Fair is this platform that invites and encourages 13 to 19-year-old young people from around the world to put forward world-changing ideas using science, Google Science Fair. And we create this platform, and like the first year, I think it was this year that we did it, the entries and the winners were mind-blowing. And again, like the Jacquard thing, you've got these geniuses who make this stuff. I try to tell the stories behind the stuff. And we had an African entrant who created a body-powered flashlight that was used because they were off the grid and they couldn't necessarily afford to continue to power it by batteries, so they created a flashlight powered by body heat so that kids could read at night when it's dark. There was a girl who created a biofuel using banana peels. And again, if you look for this stuff online, you'll find it all. There was another guy from Greece who created this sort of exoskeletal Arduino glove for his arthritic grandmother. But the one that blew my mind was the 17-year-old girl who was a bit of a coder. She lived in Florida. She had a sick cousin who was, I believe, diagnosed with cancer. And she came up with a way of creating a neural network based on how cloud computing works. And that would detect breast cancer, that would help detect breast cancer with an accuracy of over 90%, okay? Now this is a 17-year-old named Brittany Wenger in Florida. And what I love about it is, again, superpowers them, not us. But we create this platform that allows them a forum to put these ideas forward. And I just want to show you a bit of the campaign and end on a little video that we did. And this was what we did, is we did a lot of research, and we found out that some of the world's biggest ideas and inventions historically, the telephone, the light bulb, computer science, a language, an alphabet for the blind, were all done by these people when they were still teenagers. And again, this isn't us just making this up. This is seriously researched, and it was like proof that you don't need to be an expert. You don't need to have like 50 years of experience to do something that could have a massive impact on society. And this was the rallying cry, that you're never too young to change the world. And that turned into this notion of on this site that it's your turn. Step up, it's your turn. And this is the platform that we created, and it would allow you to register, it would allow you to create your experiment, it would allow you to collaborate with people globally. And I'm just going to end on this film that we used to launch the initiative. So finally, when I sit with my teams, when I talk to them with the idealists and vagabonds, this is kind of what we strive to do. I'm not sure we're just there yet, but if you can kind of make a bit of a dent in the universe by creating these things that allow other people to come with like early cancer detection systems, that's kind of cool. You've made a bit of a contribution, but by the same token, I task them to make stuff that can also make the web better for the world. And I think that there's a lot of, we're in the industry that produces sometimes a lot of pollution. There's a lot of pollution out there. And I say to my people, you got to make stuff that's better and that's making a positive contribution, an impact, and all these things we talked about when we talked about know the user and everything that revolves around their everyday lives. So thank you very much for listening.